Greetings. I hope you're well. I'm back again and we're continuing Wishful Thinking. We're on session number 7 already, and we've gotten into the eyes. And the first word today is immortality. Immortality means death-proof. To believe in the immortality of the soul is to believe that though John Brown's body lies smoldering in the grave, his soul goes marching on, simply because marching on is the nature of souls, just the way producing butterflies is the nature of caterpillars. Bodies die, but souls don't. True or false, this is not the biblical view, although many who ought to know better assume it is. The biblical view differs in several significant ways. Number 1, as someone has put it, the biblical understanding of human beings is not that they have bodies, but that they are bodies. When God made Adam, he did it by slapping some mud together to make a body and then breathing some breath into it to make it a living soul. Thus the body and soul which makes up human beings are as inextricably part and parcel of each other as the leaves and flames that make up a bonfire. When you kick the bucket, you kick it 100%, all of you. There is nothing left to go marching on with. Number 2, the idea that the body dies and the soul doesn't is an idea which implies that the body is something rather gross and embarrassing, like a case of hemorrhoids. The Greeks spoke of it as the prison house of the soul. The suggestion was that to escape the body altogether was really not a disaster at all. But the Bible, on the other hand, sees the body in particular and the material world in general as a good and glorious invention. How could it be otherwise when it was invented by a good and glorious God? The Old Testament rings loud with the praises of trees and birds and rains and mountains, of wine that gladdens the heart of man and oil that makes his face shine, and bread that strengthens him. Read the 104th Psalm, for instance, or try the Song of Solomon for as abandoned and unabashed celebration of the physical body as you're apt to find anywhere. As for the New Testament, Jesus himself, far from being a world-denying ascetic, was accused of being a wino and a chowhound. Look that one up, Matthew 11, verse 19. I discovered this late in my seminary. I never knew it was there. Matthew 11, 19. Jesus was accused of being a wino and a chowhound. When Jesus heard that his friend Lazarus was dead, he didn't mouth any pious cliches about what a wonderful, merciful release it was. Jesus instead wept. The whole idea of incarnation, of the Word becoming flesh, affirms the physical and fleshly in yet another way by declaring that it was a uniform God himself wasn't ashamed to wear. St. Paul undoubtedly had his hang-ups, but when he compares flesh unfavorably to spirit, he is not talking about body versus soul, but about the old person without Christ versus the new person with Christ. Number 3, those who believe in the immortality of the soul believe that life after death is as natural a human function as waking after sleep. The Bible, however, instead speaks of resurrection. It is entirely unnatural. We do not go on living beyond the grave because that's how we are made. Rather, we go to our graves as dead as a doornail and are given our lives back again by God. In other words, we're resurrected by God just as we were given them by God in the first place. Because that is the way God works. Number 4, all the major Christian creeds affirm belief in resurrection of the body. In other words, they affirm the belief that what God, in spite of everything, prizes enough to bring back to life is not just some disembodied echo of human beings, but a new and revised version of all the things which made them the particular human beings they were, and which they need something like a body to express. Like their personality, the way they looked, the sound of their voices, their peculiar capacity for creating and loving, and in some sense, their faces. Number 5, the idea of the immortality of the soul is based on the experience of humanity's indomitable spirit. However, the idea of the resurrection of the body is based on the experience of God's unspeakable love. Next word, incarnation. The Word became flesh, wrote John, and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. It's John 1, verse 14. That is what incarnation means. It is untheological, it is unsophisticated, it is undignified. But according to Christianity, it is the way things are. All religions and philosophies which deny the reality or the significance of the material, the fleshly, the earthbound, are themselves denied. Moses at the burning bush was told to take off his shoes because the ground on which he stood was holy ground. And incarnation means that all ground is holy ground because God not only made it, but walked on it, ate and slept and worked and died on it. If we are saved anywhere, we are saved here. And what is saved is not some diaphanous distillation of our bodies and our earth, but our bodies and our earth themselves. Jerusalem becomes the new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven like a bride adorned for her husband. That's in Revelation 21, verse 2. And our bodies are sown perishable and raised imperishable. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 42. One of the blunders of religious people are particularly fond of making is the attempt to be more spiritual than God. Israel. As soon as God decided to take a hand in history, he had to start somewhere. What he elected to start with was Israel. This election has been a constant sort of dismay, delight, and embarrassment to them both ever since. The account of the first few millennia of their stormy affair is contained in the Old Testament. When Israel asked the question why God elected them, of all people, They arrived at two main reasons. One answer was that God elected them for special privilege. But the tragic course of their own history soon disabused them of that. The other answer was that He elected them for tremendous responsibility. When Israel asked the question what the responsibility was that God had saddled them with, they arrived at two main answers. One answer was that their responsibility was to impose upon the world the knowledge of the one true God. But they were never very successful in doing that. The other answer was that their responsibility was to suffer and die for the world. None of them wanted to suffer and die very much, including Jesus. But Jesus did it anyway. It was only afterward that people began to understand why this was necessary. Although nobody has ever explained it very well, and Jesus himself never seems to even tried. When Jesus died, something happened in the lives of certain people that made explanations as unnecessary as they were inevitable. And it has been going on and happening ever since. Moving right along, we're now on the J's. Excuse me. How wonderful. The first J word is Jesus. According to John, the last words Jesus spoke from the cross were, "It is finished." Whether he meant finished as brought to an end in the sense of finality, or finished as brought to completion in the sense of fulfillment, nobody knows. Maybe he meant both. What was brought to an end was, of course, nothing less than his life. The Gospels make no bones about that. He died as dead as any man. All the days of his life led him to this day, and beyond this day there would be no other days, and he knew it. It was finished now, he said. He was finished. He had come to the last of all his moments, and because he was conscious still, alive to his death, maybe, as they say the dying do, he caught one final glimpse of the life he had all but finished living. Who knows what he glimpsed as that life passed before him? Maybe here and there a fragment preserved for no good reason, like old snapshots in a desk drawer. The play of sunlight on a wall, a half-remembered face, something somebody said, a growing sense perhaps of destiny, the holy man in the river, a gift for prayer, a gift for moving simple hearts. And one hopes he remembered good times, although the Gospels record few. How he once fell asleep in a boat as a storm was coming up, and how he went to a wedding where water was the least of what was turned into wine. Then the failures of the last days, when only a handful gathered to watch him enter the city on the foal of an ass, and those very likely for the wrong reasons. The terror that he himself had known for a few moments in the garden, and that finally drove even the handful away. Shalom, then. Peace. The God in him moving his swollen lips to forgive them all, to forgive maybe even God. It was finished. What was brought to completion by such a life and such a death, only he can now know. The Christ of it is beyond our imagining. All we can know is the flesh and blood of it, the Jesus of it. In that sense, what was completed was at the very least a hope to live by, a mystery to hide our faces before, a shame to haunt us, a dream of holiness to help make bearable our nights. Jewels. This reading comes from Ezekiel 28, verses 13 and to 16. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. The Lord said to the king of Tyre, carnelian, topaz, and jasper, onyx, sapphire, carbuncle, and emerald. But then, as the Lord goes on to explain, because the king fell from innocence into sin, I cast you as a profane thing from the mountain of God, and the guardian cherub drove you out from the midst of the stones of fire. One way or another, we have all fallen like the king. Yet we also carry within us a memory of the Garden of Eden. It is perhaps why jewels fascinate us so, and why we value them above almost all things. In their starry depths, we see glimmers of where we have come from, and also of where, according to ancient prophecy, we are going. We are going to that city whose walls are chrysoprase. That's a green jewel. Jacinth, that's an orange-red jewel. Amethyst, that's a purple jewel. And the 12 gates, and the 12 pearls, and the street gold. Read Revelation 21, 19 to 21. Job. Job is a good man and knows it, as does everybody else, including God. Then one day his cattle are stolen. His servants are killed, and the wind blows down the house where his children happen to be whooping it up at the time, and not one of them lives to tell what it was they thought they had to whoop it up about. But being a good man, he says only, the Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Even when he comes down with a bad case of boils, and his wife advises him to curse God and die, he manages to bite his tongue and say nothing. It's his friends who finally break the camel's back. They come to offer their condolences and hang around a full week. When Job finds them still there at the start of the second week, he curses the day he was born. He never quite takes his wife's advice and curses God, but he comes very close to it. He asks some unpleasant questions to God. If God is all cracked up to be, how come houses blow down on innocent people? Why does a good woman die of cancer in her prime while an old man who can't remember his name or hold his water goes on in a nursing home forever? Why are there so many crooks riding around in Cadillacs and so many children going to bed hungry at night? Job's friends offer an assortment of theological explanations, but God doesn't offer one. God doesn't explain. God explodes. He asks Job who he thinks he is anyway. He says that to try to explain the kinds of things Job once explained would be like trying to explain Einstein to a little-necked clam. He also, incidentally, gets off some of the greatest poetry in the Old Testament. Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow, says God? Canst thou bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades? Hast thou given the horse strength and clothed his neck with thunder? Maybe the reason God doesn't explain to Job why terrible things happen is that he knows what Job needs isn't an explanation. Suppose that God did explain. Suppose that God were to say to Job that the reason the cattle were stolen, the crops ruined, and the children killed was thus and so, spelling everything out right down to and including the case of boils. Job would have had his explanation. But then what? Understanding in terms of the divine economy why his children had to die, Job would still have to face their empty chairs at breakfast every morning. Carrying in his pocket, straight from the horse's mouth, a complete theological justification of his boils, he would still have to scratch and burn. God doesn't reveal his grand design. He reveals himself. He doesn't show why things are as they are. He shows his face. And finally, Job says, I had heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see thee. Even covered with sores and aches and ashes, he looks oddly like a man who asked for a crust of bread and had been given the whole loaf, at least for the moment. Joke. Many ministers include in their sermons a joke or two which may or may not be relevant to what the sermons are about, but in any case are supposed to warm up the congregation and demonstrate that preachers are just plain folks like everybody else. But there are two dangers in this. One is that if the joke is a good one, the chances are it will be the only part of the sermon that anybody will remember on Monday morning. The other is that when preachers tell jokes, it is often an unconscious way of telling both their congregations and themselves that the gospel is all very well, but in the last analysis, not to be taken too seriously. The next word is joy. And I think of my friend, Joy Lemke. In the Gospel of John, Jesus sums up pretty much everything by saying, "These things I have spoken to you, that joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full." That's in John 15, verse 11. He said it at the supper that he knew was the last one he'd have a mouth to eat. Happiness turns up more or less where you'd expect it to. A good marriage, a rewarding job, a pleasant vacation. But joy, on the other hand, is as notoriously unpredictable as the one who bequeaths it. I think we'll go for one more. Judgment. We are all of us judged every day. We are judged by the face that looks back at us from the bathroom mirror. We are judged by the faces of the people we love and by the faces and lives of our children and by our dreams. We are judged by the faces of the people we do not love, Each day finds us at the junction of many roads, and we are judged as much by the roads we have not taken as by the roads we have. The New Testament proclaims that at some unforeseeable time in the future, God will ring down the final curtain on history, and there will come a day on which all our days and all the judgments upon us and all our judgments upon each other will themselves be judged. The judge will be Christ. In other words, the one who judges us most finally will be the one who loves us most fully. Romantic love is blind to everything except what is lovable and lovely. But Christ's love sees us with terrible clarity and sees us whole. Christ's love so wishes our joy that it is ruthless against everything in us that diminishes our joy. Let me read that one more time. Christ's love so wishes our joy that it is ruthless against everything in us that diminishes our joy. The worst sentence love can pass is that we behold the suffering which love has endured for our sake. And that is also our acquittal. The justice and mercy of the judge are ultimately one. All right, let's stop there. And next time we will begin with the word justification. And that's about a page. All right, stay well, wear your masks, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.